Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the More Than You See podcast, where I have meaningful conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys. Please note, I am not a licensed practitioner or therapist, but an actor and a filmmaker who is deeply interested in sharing my own struggles and exploring the mental health of others. My hope is that these conversations bring you some joy, some personal understanding, and some tools so that you can build your own mental health toolbox. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another interview episode of the podcast. Today, I have the incredible Elizabeth Boykewich on the podcast. She is a casting director and career coach. She was a casting director for over 17 years, working with ABC Family and then Freeform, and was just paramount to a lot of the most incredible shows that got fostered at Freeform, including The Fosters, Pretty Little Liars, Siren, one of my absolute favorites, The Bold Type. And, we talk a lot about being part of corporate culture when it comes to casting and how that relates to just corporate culture around the world. That I'm always focused on this idea of the fact that I have conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys and how that impacts their lives and all of those other things, but how, these conversations are really available and pertinent to everyone. Because some of the things that she experienced at Freeform as it transitioned from ABC Family to Freeform to being purchased by Fox and all of those things, how that impacted the culture of the business as well as her own personal exploration of what her job was and what it meant and her relationship to other people. And, so we really talk a lot about life transitions on this podcast. She is also very vulnerable and shares how she has an autoimmune disease and how that and chronic pain has impacted her and impacted her life. And finally, we really talk about how her understanding of people and her willingness and ability to connect with people has transitioned her into now focusing on being a career coach. As she, shares on this podcast, she definitely is still a casting director. She still casts. She actually still produces. She has a play that she is producing right now that's showing in May. But she has this newfound love of helping people through their own ups and downs. And I found this episode so impactful for me in so many different ways. You'll hear me keep focusing in on different word choices that she uses that kind of just helped open up my mind to things in a completely different way. And I just really came out of this episode feeling very connected with myself and my own goals, and really understanding the importance of having someone like Elizabeth Boykewich in your corner. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with her and share it with you all. And please, without further ado, enjoy this episode with Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
I am so well. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have you here. And I think you have listened before, but in case you haven't, one thing that I like to do is kind of like rewind people and do like a mental health check-in as far as like, how are you actually doing? Like, what's your brain and mind and heart speaking to you today?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I am actually doing very well.
Great.
And I have an autoimmune. So I deal with some randomized and chronic pain in different parts of my body. And so depending on what my body is doing on any given day, that has a big effect on my mental health.
I'm sure.
For sure, right? And so overall, I feel positive and happy with my purpose and what I'm doing in the world and the people I get to love and the people that love me and making creative things and being a creative person. All of those really feed me. And I absolutely have days where it's like, oh, today's hard to walk. right?
Absolutely.
Where I'll just have a little bit of a limp or something, right? Because I'll have a little bit of hip pain, and that can have an effect for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to talk about that a little more. We're definitely going to get into all of your career stuff and, how you help so many people as a career coach. But with an autoimmune disease, that's something we haven't talked about much actually on the podcast. And, I'm curious, like, when did this first come up for you, and how did you take that as a person, as far as like understanding that your body is sometimes going to make daily things difficult?
Yeah, decisions for you. It started years ago, maybe about 10 years ago. And I remember going to my general doctor. I just felt off and sort of heavy in my chest, right? And I remember going to my doctor and exhausted. I was feeling exhausted in a way that didn't make sense. And I'm someone who's had always been strong. Like, I ran marathons and half marathons. I was doing boot camps. I was always very active, right? I was going dancing a lot at night just because I love dancing, right? So I was someone who had boundless energy. And maybe about 10 years ago, I just started feeling a little off. And I remember going for my yearly checkup and saying to my GP, like sharing with her, and she kept very adamantly telling me nothing was wrong with me. We hear this story a lot for women in the medical industry. Yeah. Nothing was wrong with me. And then she kept telling me I was depressed. And I said, I know I'm not depressed. Like, I can feel something. I didn't know what it was. So that's how it started. And I had years of just not being believed by doctors and powering through, which I think I can only, not to genderize it, but I am a woman, so I will genderize it. And what I've seen in a lot of people that I have worked with, a lot of clients or friends and other executives when I was an executive, is a lot of women just power through. Right. And so that's how I was dealing with it too. So it was years and years and years. And then it started to manifest in different ways, just like a little bit of body pain here. And a lot of the common things that it can be. You hear of a lot of women in corporate developing autoimmune diseases, right? When we become dysregulated. So it was kind of a long journey for me to figure out what was going on. And still sort of, and it's different. I am much better now, but yeah, sometimes stuff crops up, and having been someone who took great pride in also my ability to produce, to make things, right? Now having to sometimes really take a step back. That's what I'm learning. Right? Yeah. That's what I'm learning right now. I'm producing a play. I produced a play that's sold out. It's this fabulous play called Shard, one-man play that we did in February, and we're doing it again in May. And what I want to do is like work endlessly on it, right? And always hustle. And, our bodies don't want that, And when I was in a place where I had boundless energy, I would push through and not listen to my body. I think that's also really the lesson and the learning here too for me is, and now my relationship is different. I have to pay attention. I can tell, right? Okay. I just have to rest,
Right. Did you get an official diagnosis, or is it a generalized autoimmune disorder?
We are still on the path.
Yeah. And isn't that, that's what, the reason I ask is obviously like in the mental health, component, so many people, once they have a diagnosis, feel like this, like the clouds part a little bit, because then you're like, oh, now I understand why I'm feeling this way. And I can relate to other people who are feeling similar and have the same XYZ symptoms.
Yeah. And so several years ago, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which a lot of women have. You can't be in a room with a lot of women and someone say, I have Hashimoto's, and lots of other people are like, I have Hashimoto's. And that's, slowing down, right? Thyroid. And that's sort of not part of me. Lots of people deal with it and have different types of symptoms. My part of Hashimoto's was not that severe. Right. So
scale,
on the scale of things, lots of people have so much pain and are dealing with lots of other things. For me, my Hashimoto's was not that. So, but when I got that diagnosis, it was like, oh, of course, okay, now we know what it is.
Right.
Right. But the other mental health component that I think is really interesting about this and can be really challenging is when you start to identify with the pain.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. It's interesting, like being in that middle ground and having to really listen to your body and make decisions based on that. You know, how long ago did you leave your corporate position?
I left in 21.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
3 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. I'm wondering, like, as you were, because you were there for a really long time,
Yeah,
right? Like
17 years.
17 years. Yeah. So, you know, being at one company for 17 years and then having that diagnosis 10 years ago, I'm curious if your mental capacity for like bullshit and stuff changed as you were able to be like, okay, I'm now putting my own health I mean, even if you can't put it first because it's so difficult as women to do that, but even if you're more aware, you know, did your just the way that you showed up daily change? And again, not to like lessen what you were doing or say that you were doing less, but just were you more aware and making decisions and saying yes to things based on taking care of yourself?
It's a really good question. I think what had more influence, honestly, was just maturity.
Yeah,
right?
for
Maturity and experience, and hopefully, as we're gaining more experience and maturity and confidence in what we do and who we are when we know ourselves better, this is how it worked for me. My ability and willingness, right? My willingness to deal with things that were not aligned was, you know, became non-existent. Right. So would a health diagnosis have go into that as well? Yes, of course, because that was something I was experiencing and certainly went into my daily, you know, my daily experiences. And what it really was is who I was growing up to be, right? And hopefully we are growing until the day we are no longer in the physical, right? But I think we're always learning and gaining wisdom, and my ability to listen to my internal wisdom became much stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we've talked offline before about you were with Freeform as head of casting for those 17 years. And, you know, we've talked a lot about how you brought all of these incredible shows to life. Like you were part of, you know, Pretty Little Liars and, you know, all of these shows that like The Fosters, you know, like these shows that were so incredibly impactful. One of my favorites is The Bold Type. It was just like one of my favorite shows. And then having that transition obviously out of that space, but also the fact that like that network has changed so much and they're not making those kinds of shows anymore. And I'm just curious how that also impacted your decision to leave as well as your own mental health.
Yes. So when I started, we were making the ABC Family Channel, right? So it was the ABC Family Channel for years and years, and then it transitioned to Freeform, and a lot of the shows that you just named were part of that. And it's interesting when you work corporate in any part of the industry, right? Because I was, yes, at the same network, but it was about 5 different networks. Right? Because we had 5 different presidents, we had many different heads of production. So there's also a lot of flex within what you're doing, right? And having to be able to work, be tenacious, and go through all of the different transitions and serve the purpose of each sort of different regime is something that happens in corporate that a lot of people don't think about, right? They think like, oh, you're in this job and it's sort of the same thing day in and day out. And it's very, very different, right? And certainly we saw, too, the type of shows we were making. And then I was working on movies. We dabble when, you know, online first came on. We're making webisodes, right? We did animated. We were doing half-hour sitcoms, single cam, hours, right? Lots of different things that had more of a sci-fi bent. And then shows like Bold Type. So it was great. I loved it, right? And I also love having something different to work on all the time. That's interesting to me. That's exciting, right? That's like the producer's brain part of me, right?
Yeah.
And I've also said, like, I've been really clear since I was very young. My purpose, one of my purposes is giving people a platform to shine, right?
Yeah.
Like, I love that, being able to sort of be with people, see where they're really going to shine or like where they're going to fit, you know, like the next right step type thing, right?
Yeah.
Which is also cool because it's helped transition into my career now as I'm coaching, right? As a professional leadership and life coach. It's the purpose gets to be the same. The way my way in and the way I'm doing it is a little different. So we were going through all these different transitions and making, but that sort of became clear pandemic time. There just was not the shows anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And I love rolling up my sleeves and putting things together, you know? And what I can say too is we're living through it right now. There's lots of changes and transitions in the business everywhere, right? In front of and behind the camera, everywhere. And Disney acquired Fox and it became a different company, right? Yeah. So the place I had worked out for a long time was changing.
Yeah.
You know, so then I was ready to work on different things.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the things, like, most of my listeners are actually not in the industry, but I think one of the reasons that they like listening to this podcast is because so many of what we experience in the industry is just a heightened version of what they experience in their own lives and corporate culture. And so, you know, having different bosses that come over, different acquisitions, you know, goals changing all of the time, being held to new standards all the time. Like, those are things that people are experiencing, I mean, throughout the world. And I think that that constantly changes the culture of the company for better or for worse. And I think that, like, you as a casting person, as a casting director, you have a similar role in that you have to see the potential in someone and the potential for how they're going to fit into the world that you're helping create.
Yeah.
And, you know, number one, I'm curious what you love about that. You seem to be someone who really, like, all of those shows that I mentioned were not shows that starred Nicole Kidman and then have all of these, you know, other characters. Like, you really built your career on finding, like, plucking people, not from obscurity, but like people, you know, a little bit like these unknowns. And I think that that's really special. And so I would love to hear, what was the thing that you loved most about that? And what were some of the key things that you would pick up on people that would be like, yes, you're my person. You're the person for this world.
It's such a good big question. So one of the things that I love the most, so I was casting my whole career, right? I studied theater. I was clear I didn't want to be a performer, right? I loved being in the world. I loved seeing shows, but I was someone that for me was like, I was behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I started casting. I got an internship, you know, after my junior year in college. And so from the time I was 20, I had found what I wanted to do professionally and I really loved it. And that started at theater in New York and like worked all around New York for a little bit. And then I moved to Los Angeles and gosh, I've been in LA for 25 years or something like that. So casting, I loved, right? And actually one of the first, I was hired as an assistant in New York when they were remaking The Parent Trap, which was one of my favorite movies, the Haley Mills one, as a child, right? We'd watch it all the time on VHS. And so I was hired to do the search there, and Lindsay Lohan came out from that search, right? We did searches in London, in like Minneapolis and Chicago and like all over, and I did the East Coast search.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the higher ups saying when we flew out like 6 girls to test with Dennis Quaid, and I remember someone saying like, well, the one who's not going to get it is Lindsay. And I thought, you're wrong, right? Because when you're casting like that she just was this like spunky, authentic, really engaged, super clear, very real person. right?
Yeah.
Little person. And I knew that was going to translate. And that's was so fun to watch, right?
Yeah.
Like being with someone that had that kind of access and presence as a little person. Right.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and then I started working on more movies and was hired for a lot of searches because I was started becoming known for like being able to identify that. Right. So when they were creating ABC Family and that job came up, I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. Like being in a place where we get to discover new stars or give the big jobs, right? It's always sort of funny when casting directors or agents will say like, I discovered Deborah Lee Smith. Well, there was a whole team of people that knew about Deborah Lee Smith. You were the person who had the job that was the right one for her.
Right.
But I loved that part, right? But also because of the type of shows we were doing and the age range, right? These were people that had trained professionally, but were young in their career. Right. For a lot of people, and not even necessarily chronological age, but it would be their first series regular, right? Or sometimes first co-star, first guest star. And because of that, after doing a couple seasons, I was like, oh, there's a need for support here. You want to talk about a mental health component, right? And just a general human being support component. So I created this course that we would share. So once you were cast as a series regular in a show, there was a course that I created where we had a mental health expert come in and talk to them about how to take care of themselves on set, right? And just as a human being, we ran them through what social media would be like. And you didn't have to do it, but this is what someone could expect. Right. We had this really brilliant woman who was running our social media at the time. She's now at Warner Records and killing it over there. But really we'd introduce them to the PR team, right? To really the people that were all working to make their show a success. But it was really important to me because you're a young person. It's your first job. I mean, even think about, I don't know, you get a corporate job or one of my first big jobs was like running the cash register at a pharmacy during the summers when I was in college. That felt like a big deal. That was like I had a cash register I had to deal with. I'd never done it before. And I remember in sort of all of my first times doing things, feeling a little lost at sea. Like, am I doing this wrong? What are the expectations? What is the framework here? Right. And that's why it became important for me to put something in place.
Yeah.
For these actors. So we would do that. And then it was really funny, Deborah. It just became a thing we did for everyone.
Yeah.
And we would also invite really the seasoned actors, like some of the people playing parents. And I remember being pulled aside by Sally Richardson, who's like this incredible director and producer now, actress. Yeah. She played a role on one of our shows and she sat through my 101 class, and she pulled me aside. She said, I wish this existed when I started in the business.
I bet. Yeah.
Because the other thing too is it's taking away, there's a funny thing in a power structure that can be there or that is imagined in the actor's mind or the person that's being hired. So when they actually were meeting the human beings, right? The woman that was running social media going, oh, this is how I would do this. Or call me if you have a question with that. It's like, oh, wait, we get to humanize the whole process. And this is a bunch of humans that are behind the project trying to make it a success, right? That community is super important, right? It's super important. And so being able to put some of those things in place and to share information and that there weren't any secrets and everyone was here wanting you to have a good experience, right? Yeah. And listen to a lot of people that are drawn to the arts. I have noticed, tell me if you've noticed the same things. A lot of us are like little sensitivos, right? Little sensitivo weirdos with our hearts. And we're trying to figure out, a lot of us are like very empathetic or empaths and have never learned how to use that or how to be with that or how to protect that, how to nurture that, right? And if you're lucky, that's something that you can start to hone and work with and nurture as you go along in your life.
100%.
And a lot of people are just like showing up and kind of emotionally like banging into walls.
Yep.
Right?
Really.
And there's a lot of pressure all of a sudden, like, oh my God, I wanted this job and now I have this job and I'm on a whole nother set and have to deal with all of these things and still run my life. Right. and be good with money and try to maintain a relationship or start a relationship, or even if it's not a love relationship, still be with my family, of origin or my friends, whatever it is, right? And and we're just not spoken to about these things, right?
Yeah.
That they're important, and they are so important, because at the end of the day, if you feel more supported and valued and seen, you're going to show up in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we all need that social media lesson. Like, everyone now needs that social media lesson, as far as like, this is how you can potentially show up. This is how you're going to be, not necessarily perceived, but like notice that like this equals this. Because I think that social media is so dangerous in so many different ways. And with my boyfriend's kids, like, we're like, they're not going to be on social media for a very long time.
Yeah.
I mean, they're 11 and 7, and constantly fighting with the 11-year-old as far as like, she can't have a phone. Like, we're not giving you technology at this point, because it's one of those things where there's a constant new world that is, being opened up, and it's so, our mental state is so fragile already. And then to introduce all of these other elements, all of these other ways that we're being spoken to, that you can't control. You have no control over how someone is going to perceive you online. And I think that that's so incredibly valuable, and such a testament to the fact that like so many actors feel like casting directors, are their gatekeepers or their enemies, or like don't have their back. And like, that right there is just the perfect example of how casting directors and how like the whole community of filmmaking, good film and good television, is this hodgepodge group of people who are just coming together to try and support each other and create something.
Yeah, and make a thing. Well, and the other thing that was interesting too, Deborah, is like when it was ABC Family, the internet, I say in air quotes, was kind of just happening, right? So Pretty Little Liars was like the first show to really take advantage of that, right? Really mobilize the audience socially, so this was very, very new when we started it too, right? And so that's why it was so important to talk about it, and a lot of actors feel pressure of like, oh God, I have to do it and I hate it. It's like, no, you don't have to do it.
Yep. 100%.
You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And you shouldn't. If this is going to be a slog, if this doesn't feel good for you, then don't do it. Period.
Yeah, absolutely. You really are in such a like people first business. And I'm curious, with your coaching, now talking to your clients who are being confronted with AI and the scary possibility of, I mean, I don't know if you watched that lovely horrific trailer of the first, what's it called, Come With Me to Paris. Did you watch that? It was like 2 weeks ago. It was the first official trailer of a full AI movie that launched like
no, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's interesting because number one, I was like, it actually made me feel better as a creative, because I was like, oh, this is real special. But I also very much was like, oh, I can see how for some people, especially so many gamers who are already in a world that is, slightly rounded corners, everything's a little bit comic book, as far as the visual aspect of things, I can totally see how someone would be like, oh, yeah, I'll watch that movie. And so I'm just curious, with these really big changes that are happening in the industry, like with AI, how are you helping people just like come to terms with it and like ground themselves back in their own magic, and like what makes them special, and like that they're gonna be okay, that they're gonna persevere through this?
I feel like your answer was in your beautiful question. Right? It really is about grounding yourself in what you have to offer, right? And tale as old as time is comparing ourselves to somebody else, right? Like, well, I don't have that. I don't do it that way. I don't look that way. I don't have that degree. I don't have, like, that's a losing battle that gets you nowhere, right? And now also to now say, and now I can't compete with a machine.
Right.
Right? I look at life through the lens of how do I use this for my growth and upliftment?
For
How
sure.
is this here for my growth and my upliftment? Right?
I love that.
And so we all have highs and we all have lows, and we're all dealing with different things. And it really is like, I mean, here's a simple example, right? Like a painful breakup. At the end of the day, we're not Pollyannaing it, right? It's not going like, oh, I'm so glad this happened to me, but it's, how can I use this to grow? Right? How can I expand? How can I support myself more? How can I learn to love myself more in this, right? And what learnings have I had from that relationship?
Yep.
You know, and how do I implement them? You know, I feel like we can really look through life through the lens of, what is this here to teach me? You know? So your question as far as like, how can you feel good about AI? I think it's a little bit too of like, we get to choose our thoughts, right? The thought isn't helpful if it's like, oh God, how can I compete with a machine? It can do it better, quicker, faster. I think it gets to be, oh, I don't like that AI is making things. What is that bringing up in me? Oh, what it's highlighting for me is I'm feeling a little angry at myself that I haven't made that thing, that I haven't written that story, that I haven't made whatever, even that TikTok video, right? That I haven't done that stand-up thing. I haven't gone to the play. I haven't, right? It's always like, what is the activation? What is the real anger? What's underneath that? What is it highlighting for you? Right? And often it's like, well, I'm experiencing some jealousy. I'm experiencing some envy. I'm experiencing a lot of anger around this. And what is that message here for me? Is I'm not making the things. I'm not fully expressed in these ways. I'm not caring for my purpose of what I'm here for by not doing it, by not being in action, right? So I always really go to the place, Deborah, of like, where's the joy in your life? Like, what are you doing? Where's the joy? Where are you being fed?
Yeah.
What is the thing? I had dinner with a friend last night, and I did a visioning session with him earlier in the year, and he realized, like, we talked about that, like, where is the joy? And also doing it by yourself. Like, what is one little thing that I can do that's going to feed me? And he actually wound up having like all of these cooking classes that he hadn't taken yet. And he's like, I'm going to do a cooking class by myself. And we're having dinner last night. And he said, you know what? Just that one realization, I've done so many things that I've loved by myself now. Right. Yeah. And he did this whole list of like all these incredible things that he had done since January. You and I are speaking to each other at the end of April, in like the past 4 months. And just that little opening, that little invitation, that awareness gave him the ability to give himself permission to go and do these things. And he's like happy and on fire and juicy and feeling great, you know? Yeah. So yeah, I find that we can get really shut down and tight and in a place when it's, I can't get. Often it's the things that we need to give ourselves, you know, inside.
So we're going to take a pause from our conversation and ask you a couple rapid fire questions. Where did you go on your last vacation or trip?
My last trip was to Idlewild for New Year's and for my fiance's birthday. My last international trip was to Italy.
Ooh, amazing. What is an irrational fear that you have?
Anytime I see a dead animal, like a dead bird or a dead squirrel I really just takes over my body.
Yeah, I can understand that. Would you say that you're more of a thinker or a doer?
I was like, I don't know. Well, clearly a thinker, if it took me that long to come up with the answer.
Wonderful. Final question. What was your last impulse buy?
My last impulse buy? A new TV.
Amazing. Awesome. All right, back to the show. How did you learn this? Because like these are big, you know, these are like seemingly simple mind shift changes, but to go from, you know, having casting as your focus to now Like you really are saying a lot of things that are very profound and very needed for a lot of people. And so from leaving Freeform 3 years ago and then now transitioning into this coaching business, like number one, like how was that for you? And like what were the things that you were like, oh, like I think people need to hear X and like how I can help someone work through this.
So I've always been a seeker and I've always had a sense that there's something bigger. I went back to school in 2013 to get my master's degree in spiritual psychology because yes, I was always sort of thinking about wrestling with practicing some of these things, but really wanted to formalize it and do my own work around it. So I was working full time and I got my master's degree in spiritual psychology.
Yeah.
I am a certified meditation teacher and mindfulness coach. I'm someone who always has been curious, right? And will take a class or do a thing or try a thing, right? And so
just really quick, what does a master's in spirituality mean?
A master's in spiritual psychology.
Yeah, or spiritual psychology, yeah.
So you're asking like, what is it?
Yeah, like what kind of classes did you take?
Oh, really interesting. I mean, it's a bit like, it's a lot of self-work. It's like a lot of counseling and facilitation, right? And in that work, you're counseling and facilitating yourself as well as the other students. You're learning that right away, right? We're also given a toolbox of skills. Things like, I think one of the first skills you learn is heart-centered listening.
Interesting.
Right? Another way that this is said is like holding space for someone, right? Where I can just sit and be with you and really listen to you, really see you, really reflect back to you, just be there for you, right? So many of us have never, ever been listened to deeply.
Yeah.
Right? And sort of the art of listening to someone exquisitely. And when you practice it with someone else, then you're able to practice it with yourself. And that makes a big difference. So we were learning skills like that, right? And we're doing projects and deep dives on family history patterns, right? Mental health patterns, divorce patterns, like birth patterns, all sorts of what people practice, like religion-wise, spirituality. And it's really interesting to start seeing all of those patterns that happen. So it was so much depth in really the soul, right?
For sure.
Is the best way to talk about it. Like the soul, like your internal experience and being with that. And so a lot of people, I did it because I wanted to learn about it. And I knew that there was something else to life than just sort of corporate success and money. And I loved having the skills that made me a better person to be around and a better person to myself and a better boss, right? A better employee, a better sister, a better daughter, all of the things, right?
Yeah.
So yes. So I went back to school for that. And then I started really using it. You're implementing it in your life, right? It's like anything, if I'm sure you have listeners that, if you're a member of a 12-step program and then how you relate to everything in your life with that framework, right? If you're a Buddhist, how you relate to your life in that way, right? Whatever your way of understanding your human experience, right? How we can give it some framework. So that became really important to me. And I was really looking at life through that lens as well. And I'm trying to think of what was the other thing. I feel like, what was the other thing that you asked me around this?
Just like how you've transitioned this into like your casting, knowledge and then transitioning that into.
Oh yeah, great. So it's interesting. The other thing I always say is like everything's for something, right? Like if you rode horses as a little kid, right? Or you play guitar or I don't know, taekwondo, or you fix cars with your grandfather, or whatever it is, right? We all have these little special skills and superpowers that are authentic to us and we use them, right? And so for me, I studied theater, right? I loved actors. I learned how to, run businesses and get productions off the ground, as well as I had this whole spiritual bent to the way I looked at the world and bringing that into like what I did was really important, as well as mindfulness and meditation. And I was also the person when I was working where other executives would come in and like ask for advice or help or, just need an ear. We all need that. So I've also kind of been that person my whole life too. And I just started really thinking, listen, I still love casting and I do cast,
Yeah.
I do cast projects here and there. I love it. And there was a real need. People just started asking me to help coach them.
Yeah.
Right. So I have my coaching certificate as well. I went back to school for that as well. So that was something that happened. I mean, the pandemic for a lot of us was really clarifying. And I think that was probably the most clarifying moment as far as the corporate life, right? And what it was. I just became really burnt out.
Yeah.
Because it was sort of work harder and more.
Right.
And so it became clear, like through some of the different transitions of regimes at the company, as well as my personal experience through the pandemic and how exhausting and tough that was for me personally, you know, and also really wanting to help support others, right? All of the work that I was doing for me was working and people were coming and asking for it. So it sort of evolved naturally, right? A lot of my clients are people that realize that there is something more, right? No matter how successful you are on paper, everyone's got something. I want to improve a relationship with my stepkid, or I want the promotion, or I feel disconnected from myself. Like we all have something, and that's what coaching is great for, right? We sit, we get to slow down, we get to look at the whys, and then we really put a plan in place. And I walk alongside you as you're implementing it and doing the work and experimenting and seeing what works for you. And it's so satisfying to see people grow, right? Mm-hmm. To see people have these transitions to like really meet themselves. And that's super exciting, but also talking about like everything's for something. Then I've been teaching some workshops for actors, right? Because I know what that is when you are a young actor trying to get a little bit of a foothold in the industry or a lot of foothold in the industry. So I use all of the parts of me, right? And all of my skills and all of my experience to serve, right? Really, the question gets to be like, how do I serve?
It's so interesting. This is like crazy, but I've never thought before about how coaching really is kind of like looking at your dreams, like looking at where the disease is in your life and trying to figure out how you can achieve those things. Mm-hmm. Like it's not just because I guess I think so much of coaching as far as like looking at the present and figuring out, like what is not working right now instead of really like projecting into the future. I know that it seems so simple, but me, for some reason, just the way that you phrase that was just really impactful for me. And so I'm curious, in this like huge moment of transition for so many people, we talked on this call, like before we started recording, about how, as a multi-hyphenate, I'm like in all of these groups and there's so many like producers and stuff now who are trying to figure out what is next because jobs are drying up. So how are you helping people in these big life transitions?
Well, it's going to be a case-by-case basis for each person, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And the industry has gone through so many different changes and transitions. I remember what year would it have been where there was another strike and like that's when reality TV became a thing. And I remember the panic around reality TV that people were like, oh God, we're not going to do scripted anymore. And that didn't happen. We wound up doing more scripted than ever, right? Mm-hmm. So there's absolutely big times of transition, and I don't believe the business is going away in any way, shape, or form. But that also doesn't answer the question that's like, this is how I was making my living and now I can't make my living in that way, right? So for each person, it's different. Everyone has a different thing. And for some people, it's really highlighted for them, I think, oh gosh, this, like, I've had a nice career and I've made some nice money doing this and now it's not there anymore. And it highlights, maybe I didn't love it. I just liked the money. It was the golden handcuffs of it, right? And for some other people, it's like, no, I just love this. So how do I do that in another sector of the business? Or not even in the business. How do I get to be creative and produce for other places, right? So there's always a slowing down that needs to take place when we look at where, and I love that you used dis-ease, right? I love it. Wherever that dis-ease is, or it can be where there really is just a desire, like everything's good, but there's really a desire for me to create something else, right? I'm ready to up level this area, or I've always wanted to, I don't know, write a children's book. You know, it can be something additional and not even something broken or wrong, you know, but really being able to sit. So this friend I was talking about who made this shift, one of the things we looked at was when we do a visioning session, right? We sit down and write like everything that's happening and everything that you wish would occur in the next 12 months, right? 12 months from now, what would I like to have occurred in my life? What would I have liked to create? And then we can go, okay, what are the things that we can really do? What are the small steps?
Right.
Because it's also just natural. It's a human experience of like, I don't know, seeing the top of the mountain, saying I'm never going to get there. And all the cliches are true, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's one foot in front of the other. It's being in action a little bit each day.
Yeah.
You know, I run a group called Thriving for young female actresses. And they do creative projects, right? It's 3 minutes of something, and it can be anything. It could be like what in the business is called a self-tape, where you put yourself on tape as an audition. And some people are making actually like sort of sophisticated mini films. And this goes back to it's always for something, right? This one woman became interested in, she thought, maybe I don't want to be an actor, but it's definitely something in the business, but she loves romance novels. And so she started doing her creative projects around like little scenes in romance novels. Well, guess what? She was at a party and met a publisher, a really big publisher for these type of novels, and started talking about what she's been doing in her creative projects, and she's getting hired by them. Right?
Amazing.
Because she leaned into what was interesting to her. And she had like a lot of shame, like, maybe I don't want to be an actor, because that was what she had wanted to do for so long. And oh my gosh, I'm confronting this, and what's next? That's scary. And it really was like, let's slow down. What do you enjoy? Okay, just one step. Let's do one little thing around that book. And then the next month was another little thing, right? And next thing you know, she's at a cocktail party with someone who's going, I need what you do.
Right.
And she had a treasure trove from the past 12 months of things that she can already share with them, right? So I also have seen, like, the universe is funny in these ways, right? Whatever your higher power is, whatever your orientation to that is like, God is funny, the universe is funny, right? When I start doing these things that feel a little juicy or exciting and I get to stretch a little bit, or it brings me some joy, it's a growth edge for me because I'm learning, it always unfolds into something else.
Okay, so I have so many follow-up questions. You know, with someone who is, I mean, the romance novelist, I can see how, you know, making that transition as far as like coming to terms like, do I still want to be an actor? But if someone still wants to be an actor and yet they're uncovering these other parts of themselves that they want to explore as well, how do you help people find that balance?
It's personal to everyone. I mean, again, we slow down and really figure out what feels the best and then see if that makes sense, right? We all have blind spots, everyone, myself included, you know, and that's the other reason a coach is really helpful, right? Is helping you work on those blind spots. And also coaches usually will just, like you just said it earlier, right? Will just help you shift the dial a little bit on how you're looking at something. And then it's like the world opens up in a different way, right? And that was, yes, for the romance novel, she also still does want to act. That's just not the only thing, right? So she's acting in these videos she's done, right? And now she's getting noticed for that, as well as being able to, you know, produce and do this other thing. So that's the thing. We all have skills. I think the thing, as far as in front of the camera, that the part that has changed is being an actor in the business has changed, because when I was starting in the late 90s, you could just have audition. Usually people had money jobs of like a waiter or a delivery person, something like this, a supplemental income, but you were able to like do guest stars and sort of, you know, cobble together a life, right? And like residuals and everything else. All of that has changed now. The world, if you were a performer, it really is what else are you doing? What are your other superpowers, right? So it's interesting that you ask me that almost like it's a bad thing or it's a hindrance, when actually this is amazing. And this is what I would, if you were sitting in front of me and were only focusing on acting, right? We'd be doing a coaching session around like, what are your other skills and what are the other ways you get to be creative and share with the world and share your voice, right? You are someone who, you produce things, you have this podcast, you are an actor, you are a writer as well too, right, Deborah? Yeah. I mean, you have all of these different things, right? So then the question really becomes, if we were to sit in session of like, where is there a part where you feel like it's missing, or you don't have enough time for something that you really want to be doing, or there's one project that really needs to get done in front of another one, right? That's how we're helping you prioritize and then build a plan around that, right? For some people coming in, it's like, oh, I've been doing this one thing, like you were talking about, I'm a reality producer. I've been doing this one thing I never really loved, but I was making good living, and now that's dried up. What do I do? That's a different type of coaching session, right? Because that's a little bit more discovery and excavation of what the real purpose is, of what is going to light you up, of what's going to feel good, and of what skills you have that can make money too, right? Like, the thing about life that I think is sort of like the BS that we're told in America is like everything should always feel hunky-dory and happy and shiny and beautiful and, Instagram, Pinterest, blah, blah. That's not what life is, right? Life is continuing to grow, continuing to learn, right? Making mistakes and then making adjustments from there, having learnings. Like, that's what life is, right? And so also coaching is a lot about, if you tend to be really hard on yourself, or you're looking at life through the filter of like, I'm doing it wrong, I'm not getting there fast enough, then there's also a lot of internal work that we get to do on starting to shift that. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at the world and your life through that lens, you're only ever going to feel terrible. You're never going to feel good enough. You're never going to feel like you're ever getting there, right? I remember talking to a girlfriend, and we were on a walk one day, and she realized, oh, I keep waiting to feel like I've arrived, right? And I think that's a lot of it for us. Like, people will think, well, once I graduate, I'll get there. Once I get married, I'll get there. Once I have the kid, I get there. Once I have the job, I'll get there. Life is a continued state of arriving. We never like arrive and are done, right? So then the question is like, how can I shift the way I am with myself as I continue to arrive to enjoy this more, right? For it to feel a little lighter, for me to have a little bit of joy, or at least a little bit of satisfaction, right?
So for someone who's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to work with you, how do they go about making that happen?
Well, I have a website and an Instagram where people can come find me. So my name is Elizabeth Boykewich, and one of my nicknames is my initials, EB, right? Mm-hmm. So the name of my company is theeb.co, so THEEB.co.
This will be in the show notes, so just go check out the link.
Yes, click on the link and email me. Say, I'm curious to have a conversation. And we have a conversation. It's free.
Yeah.
Right? We'll have a Zoom conversation. We'll just be curious about where you are and maybe what you want to do, or where you want to go, or what you need some support with or help on, right? Coaching is different than therapy. Therapy, often you're digging up old things, right? And sort of looking at the why. Where coaching, we are talking about the present. Of course, sometimes some old ways of being or thought patterns will come up, but coaching is different, where we're actually working on a specific thing, right? For you. So yeah, pop me an email and we'll get you on my calendar, and we'll just sit on Zoom and have a conversation, and see if it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of my final questions that I like, the first one is, what are some tools that, you've mentioned before, like heart-centered listening.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to, like, if that's a tool that you help teach people as far as like how to tap into their own intuition, just like, what are the tools that you help? Maybe name 2 if possible.
It's really profound for people, and I can already hear eyes rolling. Because we hear it's become a little bit trendy, right? Like meditate, quiet time, breath work. Well, everyone keeps saying it, because it works and it's true. But on YouTube, I'll share this with you. There's actually a 3 minutes. I do it sometimes waiting in the car. Like the other day, my fiance jumped out of the car to go grab something, and I did the 3 minutes of breath work. And it really, you do it every day and it changes. You can do it in your car anytime. You can do it, well, not while you're brushing teeth but it can be done really quickly. Or rather, I don't want to say quickly, the threshold of time, it's so low, right? But what has been really transformative for some people that I've worked with is a morning practice, whatever it is that works for you. A lot of people have a lot of resistance around meditation because they have the misunderstanding that they're supposed to empty their mind and have no thoughts. That's not what meditation is. Meditation is slowing down, making space for yourself. You are going to have thoughts. You notice the thought, and then you just come back to your breath, right? So a morning practice, it could be reading 10 pages of a book. It could be quiet time. I have some audio meditations where then you're actually just listening to a visualization. So it's not having to, be quiet by yourself if that feels really challenging for you.
Right.
But what I've seen transform people and the way they're showing up is doing like a 10-minute practice in the morning and just staying consistent with it, or as consistent as you can. And listen, you're going to fall off the wagon. You get back on the wagon. That's it, right? We have some days where you don't feel good or you don't want to do it, and then you just do it the next day, right? It's just the 24 hours in front of you that I think is also helpful, right? That's another tool. A lot of people are like, oh my God, living in the past or living in the future, and then this is going to happen or I'm never going to get there, when it's like all you need to be with is the next 24 hours in front of you,
I love that, because it's something where you just think about, or I often think about, okay, so like, what is my goal? What am I going to accomplish today? Like my days are often very structured between all of my different jobs and all of my different projects and all of those things. But it's again, it's interesting, just the mind shift of the wording, as far as like, it's not about the day, it's about the 24 hours. Like what is, and I mean like this, where it's like, okay, so the next hour and a half, I'm going to spend time with you, and I'm going to learn more about you and what you do and how you give back to the world and all of these things. And then I will shift my focus to the next hour and a half chunk and how that will unfold for me. And that's just an interesting little mind shift to allow yourself to just be present.
Yes.
In that hour and a half. And
even when you say it like that, Deborah, like I just feel so much more space and calm, right? Mm-hmm. When I think it's and I still fall into it. I practice this stuff, right? The stuff that I'm teaching, I practice. It's like, instead of going like, oh my gosh, I have to do a podcast interview, and then I have to take so-and-so to go sell Girl Scout cookies, and my dogs have a vet appointment later. And then, oh my God, I need to get my taxes thing in. And right? That's how so many of us live in our head the minute we wake up. Right? So this is also why a slowing down practice in the morning, don't pick up your phone, don't look at your emails for at least 10 minutes, just 10 minutes.
My final questions is always, like what masks are we, we always have masks that we wear, and that's where More Than You See really came from, that name, as far as like what is going on inside that we're maybe not sharing with the outside world. And I'm wondering if you're willing to share if there's a part of yourself that you are working on internally that is potentially showing up as a mask that you're working on trying to take down or work through.
Ooh, such a good question. You know what? I think a mask that I used to wear was I have it all together. And just a tiny bit of a shift or a nuance for me. Well, and feeling like I have it all together, but then inside really feeling like I don't have this, I'm freaking out about this, right? When now I'm in a place where it's when those things pop up, for me, it's a little bit, and it's a gentle, I got this, right? Instead of the mask of like, I got this, I'm going to do it. It really is like, I trust that this, I got this. I can handle this. I can deal with this. I get to be present for this, right? For a lot of my life felt really scary and felt like something to grit my teeth and really push through. I was really armored up and not present.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also too why I have all of this study, because I knew I needed to learn it myself, right?
Yeah.
Being in a place of like, it's okay. It's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the one that I continue to work on too is just really being able to be more present.
Yeah.
And state needs.
Yeah. I think, again, your word choice as far as like, I get to be present is so important, because it is one of those things where it's like, it's a gift to be able to shut off everything else and just be like, I'm just going to be with you in this moment. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And, we multitask all of the time. I'm sure people listening to this podcast are multitasking while they're listening, because that's how I listen to podcasts. But I think that it's so wonderful, even for 30 seconds, when we hear something on a podcast that we're like, ooh, that really resonates with me. I'm just going to sit in that for 30 seconds and just think about how that plays in my brain and how that's going to impact my life in some way.
I love that observation. And what came to mind was like something I just have hated is dishes. I hate doing dishes.
Yeah.
I hate them, right? That really was a thing where I'd look at the kitchen and like I wouldn't want to cook because I wouldn't want to. That was something I really observed. And I love cooking. I'm a really good cook.
I'm the same.
Yeah. And so when I was thinking about multitasking, this place of like, yes, putting on a podcast or putting on music that you enjoy and doing the thing, right? Like my fiance, I don't know that he loves doing dishes, but he does them with a smile on his face. And me just even being around and observing that in him is like, oh, I realize how much I would be doing this task that needed to be done every day. Right. Or should be done, we get to, care and clean our homes if we have the capacity to do so. And I was expending so much energy doing it and also being like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. As opposed to just like completing the task. Right? And so my experience while doing it and after completing the task was wildly different. If I was spending all of my time thinking about how much I hate it and resent it and it's so bad and I had to clean too much as a child and I hated it, right? When it's like, stop. You get to just wash the frying pan and listen to a song you like, One other thing that has worked for some of my clients and some of the people in my group, there's one woman that I work with that has some neurodivergence and sort of completing tasks can be a challenge for her. She happens to love Taylor Swift, and a practice we put in for her each evening was she would pick a song that she particularly loved and she would straighten her room to a Taylor Swift song. Just one song, right? 3 minutes, 4 minutes, right? Or she'd wipe down her kitchen counters to one song, right? That's such a good tool. Because you're giving your ears something that you love, it's over quickly, and you've just done a little bit of a something, right? That's a tool that's also been really effective for some people.
100%. That's awesome. Thank you so much for just all of your wisdom and vulnerability, Elizabeth. It's been really, really awesome to talk to you.
I've loved being with you. Thank you so much for this time.
Thanks again, everyone, for being a part of this episode of the podcast. I hope that you got as much out of this episode as I did. Like I mentioned in the intro, there were so many different small word choices that she used that have sat with me and impacted me for, a long time after having this interview. Just this idea of focusing on the fact that right now in the moment, we get to have the ability to listen to this podcast, to multitask and do whatever else you're doing besides listening to this podcast. Like, it is such a privilege that we get to focus our energy in these different ways. And I certainly know, number one, I need to start doing that 3-minute meditation and breath work that she does, because I certainly always feel very intimidated by having a meditation practice. And this, conversation just reminded me how important it is to have some kind of morning routine to kick off my day. And I really hope that this episode made you feel a little less alone. I know there's a lot of turmoil happening in this industry right now, and in all industries. There's so much fluctuation that is happening. But I think the key takeaway for me was focusing on what makes you, makes myself, makes everyone special, and understanding that those special qualities are what will continue to bring us through hard times. And that in the future, when we look back on this 2024 year, there will be things that we learned about ourselves and about others that will have a positive impact on our future, because that's the way that life works. And this episode really reminded me of that. Please make sure to go and check out all of her links in the show notes. Definitely reach out to her if that's something that you're interested in doing. I know I'm very excited to start working with her. And I want to give a very special shout out to my incredible friend and editor of this podcast, Kadra Parkman, as well as our composer of the music, Ryan Ricks from Salt and Sea Studios. I also want to say thank you so much to all of my listeners. Please, usual plug, rate, review. It really does help spread the word of mouth. Just share this episode with someone who you think it might resonate with. Again, please be kind to yourself this week. Remember that you and everyone around you is more than you see. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to chatting with you in a few short weeks.